given the choice between J.D. Vance and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, one which would defend and promote the cult, AOC supports unions and may have some of those policies. I don't think that your vote would be decided. I think that you struggle with that decision, and I think you might come out with supporting Vance.
I really do think there is a need for conservatism to spend like 5-10 years in the wilderness. And I think JD Vance, especially if Vance is the head of the ticket, if the election were today, I would go with AOC.
Oh wow!
4 years from now, who knows what issues will be there? But that's kind of currently how I'm thinking about these things.
Hey folks, please like, comment, and subscribe, and make sure to check out my newsletter. Information is in the description. Richard, how are you? It's awesome to talk to you after really seeing a lot of you making the rounds. In whether that's on Breaking Points, whether that's on Steven's channel, and talking a little bit about the Trump administration. And recently, you've been very critical about some of the stuff that's happening. So yeah, welcome. Why don't you tell my audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Pisco. I am sort of new to the streaming world. Steve is really the only person I think I've ever streamed with, maybe a few others, but I'm not of the streaming generation. I'm a writer. I have my own Substack. I'm on Twitter all the time. I've written a few books. I'm gonna write another book, and that's pretty much all there is to me.
Yeah, no, and so one of the reasons that the first interaction I ever had with you was on election night, and I also saw one of your articles.
Oh, you were with Steve.
Yeah, so I was there when we were doing like the whole Elon Musk, will he be HHS or not? Will we? Yeah. But I don't want this, and you can talk a little bit about that, but I don't really want this to be another mea culpa stream or where like you're talking about how you change your mind on certain things, because I feel like you've done it enough. And I kind of just want to get into the politics, but I'll give you a second if you want to linger on the fact that you did support the Trump administration, or sorry, you supported voting for Trump. Tell me where I'm wrong. It was kind of an estimate that it would approximate first administration Trump, and where the people around him would sort of, like they did in the first administration, though I don't know if I agree so much with that premise. They did, certainly, I think, limit what he wanted to do in many occasions, and I think you were taking a bet that would be more the case than what we're seeing now, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah. I saw that. I believe in smaller government. I believe in less government regulation. I believe in, the basic conservative things. I think conservative-run states have better policies than liberal-run states. And that's the case for Trump. Now, I agreed with people who talked about Trump-specific flaws. I had no gripe with Steve when we talked about these things, that he tried to overturn the election and he lies a lot, that his followers are a cult. But first administration, that stuff was kept in line and he was just ranting all day on Twitter. Second administration, as it turned out, the cult has kind of hollowed out everything else in the Republican Party. There's no opposition to him in conservative media within the people he appointed. Only the judiciary, because the judiciary is people who are not subject to voters or not subject to conservative media. So they're a little bit isolated. They can still stand up to Trump, and they came up decades ago in some cases, and so they're not selected through the MAGA kind of bottleneck that you have to get through today. So there's a lot of specific things, but I'm not happy with this administration.
Yeah, I don't want to linger too much on the mea culpa. You've done it already, so let's just get right into it. And I wanted to actually start with where you just left off, which was in fact the judiciary. Now, I disagree a lot with the Federalist Society appointees and the conservative judiciary that we've seen in the last really 10, 15 years. The growth of this this movement, and really now I would say it is the kind of mainstream doctrine, this originalist framework, this looking at history, a more conservative judicial philosophy. Even like the liberal justices are doing it. Even like Justice Jackson is employing some version of originalism as her sort of major philosophy. But talk to me a little bit about the judiciary. That indicates to me the fact that it is true. The judiciary has been a bulwark against some of these excesses. Let's first talk to me about how you're feeling about the judiciary currently. Are you exceptionally happy with everything that's happening there? You think it's working just as we should expect? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, I think it's the one part of our system that is really doing its job. I actually worry a little bit about. I don't think he started to appoint judges yet, but I actually worry about what kind
The
of
new
people they're going to
judges.
appoint next because he hates now the three people who he appointed the first term. I mean, Alito and Thomas are maybe the only two, and they were not Trump appointees. They're basically the only two that MAGA is happy with at this point. And so Trump had three appointees, and he doesn't like all of them. So I don't know. God knows what we're going to get Judge Janine or something if we get
Yeah.
another Supreme Court opening. But basically, yeah, I mean, there was just a Trump appointee today
Yep.
who ordered that they bring back a second man who they sent to El Salvador, who's a Venezuelan. And, they had that 9-0 decision in the Abrego Garcia case. So generally, they're doing what they should be doing. I think they should probably be pushing back even more, if anything, but, it's holding up well relative to other things.
Yeah, no, I saw that opinion from a judge, Trump appointed judge in this is an Alien Enemies Act deportation, so not the wholly lawless. Although I still think it was wholly lawless to do the Alien Enemies Act deportations, but not that like clear statutory violation that existed with respect to the Abrego Garcia case. But I will note, yeah, we're seeing even Trump-appointed justices and judges standing up to some of the worst excesses of Trump. I'll note, even in the dissent, there was an extraordinary decision by the Supreme Court over the weekend, last weekend actually, to put a halt to all purported Alien Enemies Act deportations I think in the Northern District of Texas or something. And it was remarkable given the speed that it got there. And even in Alito, who I think is wrong on some of the process stuff, even in his dissent, he admonishes the executive branch to follow the law. Did you see that part of his dissent?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think what's important to understand is like it's what is all this related to is the idea that to be a MAGA in good standing these days, there is nothing but loyalty to Trump, right? And if you are a conservative media figure, you will not have an audience. It's amazing. I go to the Free Press comment section, and the
Mm-hmm.
Free Press is not marketed to like MAGAs exclusively, although it has some MAGA adjacent content. And I'm amazed by this because like it'll be something which will touch on some criticism of Trump, and people won't care about anything. All they care about is you criticize Trump. When I was on Breaking Points recently,
Oh, right,
I
yeah.
thought that it might be a little bit controversial that I would be on, but nobody was complaining about the other controversial stuff in the past. All they were upset about was that I talked about Trump. So it's amazing. There's like 30-40% of the country who has nothing going on in their brains except loyalty to Donald Trump. And this is like the only way you can be in conservatism these days. You can only be a conservative thinker or in the administration or a media figure. And judges are appointed for life, and many of them were appointed decades ago, and they're not MAGAs, and they don't have a MAGA constituency. They always have to be playing to. And so I think this is a good demonstration of just like how awful the conservative movement has become because like it's hard to imagine you even going too far for them at this point.
Yeah, so I want to touch base on that because in terms of conservative media outlets, I wonder at an institution like the National Review, what actually is who's their audience? Who's listening to the National Review? And like, what are they doing?
Barely, I mean, barely. Maybe some conservative judges, maybe.
Yeah,
I
maybe.
mean,
Yeah.
but it's not a huge audience. I like some people at National Review. I like some of their content, but they're not as big as like Cat Turd or Jack Posobiec on Twitter
Gotcha.
for a reason.
Yeah.
And sometimes the conservatives I like, the people you like. I mean, you probably never heard of them, or maybe just seen them on Twitter a few times. There's people like Sam Hammond. There's people like Charles Lehman. These are not big accounts. They're great and they're smart people, but they're 10-15,000 people. That's like the maximum you can get as like a smart conservative. There's no audience for it. I don't know. I mean, I became sort of big, but I had to, my
Yeah.
base is kind of broader than conservatism. And so it's just awful. I mean, I always had this thing about low human capital and what the right was becoming. I think the administration, the way it's been behaving, the Doge stuff, the cutting funding for basic science, and then the way the tariffs, just like the way the decision was made, and then the going back and forth, and all these idiots just coming around and saying, part of the deal. It's like it's
Yeah.
like I had my final break with low human capital. Like there has to be some line, and I'm done with this. I'm done with this whole cult. Like you guys have your thing. I have little hope that this thing is going to get better.
How sustainable do you think it is? Because on the one hand, it does seem to be completely totalizing in terms of the Republican party and in terms of your future, if you want to be a Republican politician or hell, even a media figure, you have, at the bare minimum, I think you have to pledge some level of allegiance to Trump and move quickly over there. Like I think right now about people like Megyn Kelly, people like Glenn Beck, who kind of started a little bit Trump critical, and even Bill O'Reilly in some instances in some of the ways he was talking, but had to over time gradually move towards being approaching cult. Although some of these people I think are, it's hard for me to imagine that they like Trump. And do you think Megyn Kelly, people like Glenn Beck, actually like Donald Trump, or do you think that they're pure? I have another question, but that's my first question. Do you think that there's some grifting going on?
I think you can't. I think it's most cases it's hard to differentiate because people will, like Glenn Beck stayed anti-Trump for a while. It was pretty impressive. I misremembered this, but I looked it up the other day. It was until 2017 or 2018. It was like after a Trump had been president for a while. So he'd won, and Glenn Beck stayed anti-Trump. His business suffered terribly,
Yep.
and now he's just like all the other ones. So is he a grifter? Does he sit there and say, now I have to change, or is he just like convinces himself? Because that's what people do. People convince themselves what's best for their own interests. So it's hard to say in any particular, unless you have like a video of them saying, "Oh my God, I hate Trump."
Like the Tucker thing with the election. I actually think
Tucker is actually. I mean, but I think Tucker, even him, I think it's an interesting case because like he gets like this 1 second. He's like, okay, Trump is crazy, but then he is getting upset at people for, and we're talking about the text messages that came out of the Dominion case. Mm-hmm. He's getting upset at people for saying the truth after that. And what happened was it's not just he was a grifter. He's not like the CEO of Fox News. It's like he convinced himself of whatever the audience was yelling him about. So this is the case. It is audience capture. It's not just they're playing to the audience consciously. They become the audience. This is like,
I think you're right about that. For a lot of these people that human beings are interesting that way. Even Ezra Klein said something similar. It might have been Ezra, or it might have been Nate Silver, one of these analytical types who said people overestimate the amount of true grifting that exists. And I happen to agree that people will find a way to convince themselves that what they're doing is the right thing. And so I happen to agree with that. My other point that I was going down, which is how sustainable this is. I say that because I look at some of these policies, the actual material effect of some of these policies. I'll just give you one touch point. We'll do two, actually. The first will be voter ID. Voter ID has been a Republican issue for decades and decades and decades. Democrats kicking and screaming to avoid some of the measures that Republicans want to put in, and Republicans trying to implement, as much as they could, voter ID. Now we're in a situation where talk about elite human capital, where the demographics of the Republican base have shifted dramatically. And you can imagine, if there were a passport ID requirement, I think it would be a Democratic wipeout at this point, given the amount of the disparity, I think, between people who are highly engaged, highly intelligent, and their party ID. So take that touch point, and then I want to finish, and then I'll let you respond to both. The other is like the economics. Here, you have a lot of people who are not homeowners, who are part of this industrial base, who are objectively going to be harmed by some of these economic policies. And even some of the new youth people that Trump has gotten on board. So let's say you want to buy a house. All these tariffs are going to definitely raise the cost of inputs on housing. The cost of financing is going up because mortgages are becoming more expensive, and then you're getting rid of like 30% of the you're trying to get rid of 30% of the construction labor. And so, how sustainable are some of these policies given the new MAGA base?
Yeah. So the voter ID thing, I mean, from what I've read, it doesn't make a big difference either way. The amount of people who don't have IDs but want to vote, I mean, you said a passport requirement. Yeah, passport requirement, but I think that would help with that. But usually they don't do a passport requirement. Like most people have a driver's license. So it's like, and it's funny because the Republicans still pass it because they believe in voter fraud conspiracy theories. And if not, they believe that they're like, they have this outdated model. They're imagining it's, 15 years ago. And the Democrats are the ones who are more likely to not have IDs, which is probably not even true anymore. And so, yeah, that's sustainable. People can do that. The economic thing, it's interesting. Nate Silver has written about this, about the decline, and they look at the decline of Trump's approval rating and historical standards. So he looks like basically like a normal president. He starts up here and he goes probably a little declining actually faster.
Yeah.
But it is like it's amazing he's still about at the same level of where he was this time in his first
Mm.
administration. Now, what does that tell you? I think this administration has been objectively much worse than the first
Yep.
administration, and so maybe it is sustainable. Like I don't know. Like it's normal politics. Normal politics would tell you that this could not work, that you wreck the economy because of this. You just wake up one day and decide to do all these stupid tariffs. The tariffs are not popular. Trump's numbers on the economy specifically are not popular. So you would think a normal politician, it would go down. Now, you also see data, though, that Democrats in like one CNN poll a month or two ago had their lowest approval rating ever, right? And so it is relative. And so I don't know. Like Trump himself might have a very high floor. That's what I think. I don't think it gets down to George W. Bush levels, and that could mean it's sustainable. I mean, he could, he feels like, he's like got Kim Jong Un kind of adulation for 35% of the country. He's happy in that case. He thinks the polls are wrong and he's got, overwhelming support anyway. Um, Hopefully they get wiped out in the midterms, but like again, who knows? Like with Elon controlling social media and like him willing to pay people to get out and vote, it's probably going to be a good year for the Democrats.
Mm.
I want it to be like something close to a wipeout, but I don't know if we'll quite get there.
Damn.
So the thing is just, I mean, the thing might be sustainable. Now, Vance will probably be that now going to the after Trump, Vance will probably be the nominee. Now, AOC is getting huge crowds, and Vance has pretty negative approval ratings. AOC has very negative approval ratings too. I think that the Democratic base is smart enough to understand that the Republican base does not look at polling and does not believe in polling. But I think if AOC is polling not very well, that probably hurts her in the primaries. But if they do somehow get like an AOC like figure, Vance could win. The Republicans might be at least competitive. So I don't know. It's sustainability. It's like you look at the new media, like Rogan and like Tucker. These people have absolutely massive audiences, and they've kind of, they've created an alternative reality for their viewers. I just saw recently that Fox had its best quarter ever, and like Fox is
Really?
getting dumber.
Yeah.
Yeah, ever. Like you think you hear all this stuff about cable news is dying, and meanwhile MSNBC and CNN, for whatever their flaws, I consider them more to be real news networks, are not doing as well. And that was a different from the pattern in the first Trump administration, where left-wing media like
Yeah.
New York Times subscriptions really took off. So I don't know. I suspect we might be an idiocracy. Like we might just be in a place where it's so stupid and Republicans are now where the voters are.
Yeah, so you're agnostic about how sustainable it is, and you're seeing indicators that are going. In fact,
Yeah, I, mean, I
you
could.
know,
It's hard to predict. I don't feel confident either way. You could tell me the Democrats wipe them out in 2026 and they win the presidency in 2028. Probably like more likely than not. Maybe that's like more than 50%. I would say more than 50% chance the Democrats win in 2028. But I wouldn't be shocked if it like is sustainable in a long term way.
I want to pick up on something you said there, right there, which was you were referencing AOC's favorables, and that's interesting because I think the fact that you even brought up AOC's favorables in a conversation about the next presidential candidate says a lot because no one. I would say no one serious. Obviously, she was too young to be the president back in the day, but I don't think people were talking about her as a potential serious presidential candidate. Before now, but now you're seeing polling that shows that she's above. She's like among the three top candidates. What do you think about that?
Yeah. I'm not surprised. So there always is this like socialist wing, right? And it was Bernie. Bernie kind of monopolized it for a lot of years since 2016, right? But he's getting old, and he's probably not going to run in 2028. So the question is, where did that energy go? Warren is like almost as old as Bernie, I think,
Yeah, yeah,
maybe a little bit younger, but really up there. And so like, where does it go? It needs to go somewhere. AOC is the highest profile person it could go to, but and look, she's got star appeal. She's pretty. I mean, she's got like she's her approval rating's on high, and she triggers the right. I sort of want her to become president because I like the freak out on the right. Like if President AOC will make Obama derangement, Michelle Obama,
look like not. Yeah.
Hillary. It will be like no, they will lose their freaking minds. It would just be kind of as an I don't like her policies, but kind of as an experiment. It would be like the funnest
Do you
outcome.
find that amusing? So you would find it amusing, or is there some kind of righteous indignation there that you want these people to get triggered? Is it because you think that they've like up shit and you want them to suffer, or is it just because you think it's funny, or both?
Well, yeah, mostly it's funny.
Yeah.
You usually don't want people to suffer. I don't know. Maybe it's okay to want people to suffer if they're really bad. Like
Hmm.
people who just spread fake news all the time on Twitter. Like I don't regret if bad things happen to them. And so yeah, the right wing sort of media landscape, I'm just very very negative on. And yeah, I'm not gonna lie that like seeing them triggered would entertain me.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. I think that both sides were waiting to. They had their. I had my like memes if Kamala wins folder, and you guys will never see those memes unfortunately because she didn't win. But yeah, I don't think that we have any problem with ridiculing the other side when they start chalking up losses, and I think the losses in terms of policy have been profound. So now I want to kind of transition into like the policy failures of this administration. I want to start with Doge and Elon. Elon was supposed to come in, and he was supposed to take an axe, very Malay style, towards departments that we don't need, towards waste, fraud, and abuse. And the entire project, I think you'd agree with me, has blown up in their face. They, by all accounts, have not been successful in. First of all, it's questionable whether there's even a legal basis for them to do it the way they're doing, and in many cases, they're being stymied by the courts in the particular ways in which it's happening. And now it looks like Elon's on the outs, or at least the administration is acting as though he's on the outs. Talk me through that the policy failures of Doge. Has he discredited that type of style? And I'll also note, and you don't have to touch on this, but I think it has spread fear in other countries. I noticed the Canadian elections. Obviously, there've been a huge impact of Trump there, but they've also had this kind of Doge-like fear created where they're trying to paint, especially in like Australia, as them as just cutters, just like Elon Musk. If not in direct, comparison to Elon, the kind of cut fear that they're generating has it been discredited? Because I know that there are a lot of people who still think that the government is way too bloated. So yeah, go ahead, Anna.
So, I mean, one of the Doge thing is like a perfect example of how even if you agree with some of these conservative principles or the principles that Trump was putting forward, it's such a dishonest and kind of stupid administration that you're not going to get the policy implemented in the way that makes sense. So the Doge thing, Elon starts by saying, we're going to cut 1 or 2 trillion. Literally impossible.
Impossible.
Like everyone who knows anything about the budget.
Can you
knows
talk a
that.
little bit about that? Because so let's look at the budget right now. So is it fair to say that something, I heard these numbers, I don't know if they're true, something like half the budget is on these big programs, another, half of that is in military, and the other half is like the rest of the discretionary spending. Can you talk the audience through like what it would actually mean to cut 1 trillion or 2 trillion from the budget, or just your intuition on it, or maybe you have some
Yeah.
facts?
So the vast majority of spending is Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and these are things that Doge can. Now they said there's so much waste, fraud, and abuse they can cut a lot, but that's not true. There's government agencies that look for waste, fraud, and abuse. There's just not that much there, and so you got these absurd lies about people who are 300 years old
Yeah.
receiving Social Security and such. So yeah, a lot of it is just checks that go out to people or healthcare. The Pentagon is another big one. Interest on the debt. Now, once you get all that, I don't have the numbers exactly
Yeah.
in front of me, but there's not much left. It's
Yeah.
probably 20 or 30% of spending. And so you could have gotten rid of like a quarter of federal government employees. It wouldn't have come close to the 1 trillion.
Yep.
It just didn't make sense. And so like anyone who knew that, anyone who just knows the basics of the budget knows that. And so then now Elon is saying, we're going for 150 billion. And like even that, there's been people who looked into it and seen that there's no kind of corroboration. Some of the stuff they're saying is just nonsense, and some of the stuff hasn't been. They haven't shown their work. And so what did they end up doing? They couldn't cut like the big ticket items. Maybe they'd want to cut Social Security, but they couldn't. You need laws for that, and that's too politically unpopular anyway.
Yeah.
And so what they cut is like employees. They focus on firing employees, which again, employees don't cost that much. If you want like to make the government more efficient, you might need more employees. Employees are not the issue here. And then basic scientific funding, they've been freezing it and trying to cut it, and it's actually like legally questionable how much of the stuff they can cut, but at least making the lives of scientists miserable. Then on top of that, you have they're trying to cut off funding to specific institutions like Harvard and
That
so
just
forth.
seems so crazy because you want to talk about elite human capital. It feels like America is becoming actively hostile towards things that are maybe the most revenue generated in the
Yeah.
long term, or at least in terms of making us a competitor to China. Like China has gone ahead on on some of these industries. I think maybe they're Ezra said that they're with us on AI. And I see other people who say that their automated or their electric cars are better than ours. And so why is the administration so hostile to academia? And now what's going on with Harvard?
Yeah, right. So I've been reading on some of the estimates of kind of the return to scientific spending, and look,
Yeah.
it's the best kind of government spending. We should be doing more of it. Now they go after it because it's like what people don't. It's actually easier to go after politically because people don't get that. If you cut their social security checks, they
Yeah.
understand, but something that's going to have, they don't understand what scientists are doing, and if something is going to have positive impact 15, 20 years down the line, people just don't get it and they don't understand. And so yeah, I mean, you do have this hostility towards academia, towards smart people in general. You look at this stuff, the war on Harvard. It's very interesting because, like, they first of all they go to Harvard, they make these demands of we're going to cut your funding. First of all, you got to get rid of DEI and affirmative action. Like, okay, that's like there's that's something I advocated for in my book. Originally they would do it the other direction, where the government would come and say we want something akin to racial quotas or DEI, not in exactly those terms, but basically, this is how a lot of universities became race conscious in the first place. That's fine, and that's based on civil rights law. But then they come and they say, we want ideological diversity, department by department. And it's just like you forget DEI. Like, like less than 10% of research scientists are Republican, so they're going to get like half the jobs. Like, there's no
Yeah.
DEI program that is that crazy and that is that extreme, that is that hostile to merit. And so, like, what are they doing? I think they just don't like universities. They don't like scientists. They don't like government employees, and they're basically driven by this hostility. And I'm disappointed, like, people who got the DEI thing, which was kind of important, but like the reason it was important was because it was anti-merit and because it was the federal government coming along and telling people telling institutions how they should function. And this is just a completely more extreme version
Mm.
of that. So yeah, you have to understand kind of it is kind of mood affiliation. Who don't they like? They don't like foreigners. They don't like people or institutions they perceive as leftists, and that's gonna put them, get them squarely focused on universities.
And I think it goes right to your point about idiocracy becoming real. And we'll transition back to Elon real quick. It seems like even the very goals themselves, as you laid them out, and I think I would agree, are just impossible. Both to the extent that they're possible, they're politically infeasible. And certainly there's a bite off more they can chew. And so it just seems that style approach is destined for failure, not too dissimilar to what I want to go on to next, the tariff situation, which is literally based on, I don't know what to call it, junk science or just a failure to comprehend what a trade deficit is. So I'll give you the opportunity to rant a little bit about the tariffs some more. And about the update to, like, in the last few days, which is that Trump is now signaling maybe we'll come down on China. Oh wait, we won't. We have to wait for a deal. And China's like, we're not even talking right now. So rant a little bit about the tariff situation. What's the way out here? Because I think it is kind of based on some of these same sentiments. This very emotional, just like the attacks on the universities. We don't like what's going on, so we're going to lash out in a stupid, impossible to implement theory, or impossible to see results on that theory. So yeah, talk about that.
Yeah, have you seen that meme where it's like Trump is like, I'm putting on tariffs, and then this stupid
It'll
guy's
help
like,
with
art of the
jobs.
deal.
Yeah.
I'm removing tariffs. Art of the deal. I'm
Yeah.
putting back tariffs. Art of the deal.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's so illogical. I mean, the Trump. It is once again this thing we talked about, mood affiliation. It is hostility to foreigners. They're like, why are they shipping Venezuelans to El Salvador? And it's like, why don't they just try to ship them to Venezuela? They at some point had an agreement with the government of Venezuela. It's like, well, it would be kind of based to ship them to El Salvador because we like Bukele and he's tough on crime, and we don't like our illegal immigrants or immigrants that are trying to get refugee status, and so we ship them to El Salvador. So it's kind of like this is how they're doing it, and when you have someone as illogical as Trump, and then you have a movement that is just about being, having a cult of personality with this irrational figure around this irrational figure, you're going to get policies that just make no sense. And someone can always reverse engineer. You can always come along and say, well, this actually makes sense because of XYZ. And you'll see that, but then they'll always have to like ignore what Trump is actually doing. So with the tariffs thing, sometimes people will come and they'll say, "Well, we shouldn't be so dependent on China," and then it's like, okay, they have no answer when you say, "Why did we put tariffs then on the countries next to China, the ones we're trying to form an anti-China bloc with, Vietnam, South Korea, Japan, right? We put it on allies as much as adversaries." And so, now he says this is how he gets to like 144%. Someone is like whispering in his ear, "Well, sir, maybe it'll make more sense if we just focus a little bit more on China." And then he does. But look, if even the tariffs, if what he said the other day, he said he's going to reduce the tariffs by a lot, and then the White House Levitt, the spokeswoman says, we're not. Either way, even if he reduce, even they reduce it by a lot, by like half of like 144%, this would decimate U.S. China trade, and I think the market is kind of it still doesn't believe it's real. I mean, like the market has gone down, but it thinks there's a probability of these tariffs staying long term. It doesn't believe it because any indication, any good news of like Bessent, seeming to say that they're going to move beyond this, makes the stock market shoot up, and this is what happened yesterday.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I don't know. He is like this, and it's going to hurt the economy, and it's going to hurt the economy already, and he's backed up a little bit. But I don't know. Like it can be like I don't think necessarily it's as clear as he's forced out of this. Like I think
Yeah.
we could have tariffs at least on China at a very high rate for a very long time.
What concerned me a little bit was everyone's acting like Basent is the adult in the room, and I guess in some ways he's, I guess, some amount of a check on the worst impulses of Trump. But then we're getting reporting that he and Elon Musk were in a shouting war, where Elon was saying, "Hey, these tariffs suck," and he was being opposition to that. And so, is he even an adult in the room?
Well, they had a shouting match. I don't know if they were shouting about the tariffs.
Okay.
Actually, they have some dispute over who should run the IRS, and I think they're actually on the same side as the tariffs because Elon, at the very least, has been saying these tariffs are stupid. I think Bessent is kind of the adult in the room. Look, it's kind of like you can't maintain your dignity and be part of this administration, but it's like there's clearly like better and worse figures. And someone like Peter Navarro is the worst. So there was this story in the Wall Street Journal where it was Bessent, and I think was Lutnick on the slide for this, but they went and they got Trump to pull back a little bit on tariffs, and they had to like wait till Navarro's like in some other room or something. It's kind of, and it's ridiculous. And Trump is like just like a baby, like he's just a baby sitting there, and like it's just going along with whoever tells him anything.
The last thing, no, that's pathetic when Laura Loomer does it too. Laura Loomer comes in, and why are you laughing? Because you know exactly what the he did. Yeah,
she's a maniac. She's a crazy, crazy woman.
So she goes in, guys, I don't know, and she like starts listing off like generals and national security people that need to go, and Trump starts firing major cybersecurity people and national security individuals, chiefs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like the national security advisors, right? And Laura Loomer is kind of the perfect person for the Trump cult because you watch her, and she is like vicious. I remember during the primaries when DeSantis, she was really going after DeSantis. She was accusing his wife of exaggerating her breast cancer.
Jesus.
And I'm really attacking DeSantis in a way that was like beyond like the way most Republicans attacked each other.
And he's done, right? I mean, he has no future in national politics. Is that fair?
No, he doesn't. No. Look, I think it's almost certainly to be Vance, just because he'll have the blessing of Trump, and I think it's still going to be a cult of personality around Trump. And the vice president gets it anyway, usually. So it's hard for me to see how it's anybody besides Vance in 2028. And so DeSantis, I think he had his moment. I said at the time he needed to go all out against Trump. He needed to fight him because, it was a cult of personality. I saw this very early, and just being like, I'm going to give you more effective policies, and Trump has lost a step, and I'm sad about that. That wasn't going to do it.
Yeah.
The spirit of the movement was just in Trump's soul, and so you had to try something I thought more radical. So yeah, DeSantis, I'd be surprised if he's a serious contender in a future race.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I think that he's done, and people are now anyone who Trump has had a feud with in that respect, even once they become allied again. Here, I'm thinking of Nikki Haley. I'm thinking of Lindsey Graham. I'm thinking of Mitch McConnell, who all ended up voting for Trump, endorsing Trump, and people don't forget. People don't for it's one thing like you were disloyal, and people remember that. Even with Lion Ted, people don't forget the fact that he was talking shit about Trump. Now, some people might be able to, JD Vance himself.
JD.
Yeah, right. So,
Yeah, right.
maybe there are some individuals that are able to get past it, but a lot of those folks that are seen as institutional aren't able to. And JD Vance is interesting to me. This guy's a piece of crap, Richard. And I have a sneaking suspicion, and I don't want this to be true. But I think that if he were to run and hang on to that cult, there's a chance that you would support him.
I would probably look. So I know JD personally. I couldn't imagine myself though supporting him for president. I think he is kind of the intellectualized version of Trumpism, and I think the intellectualized version of Trumpism is worse than, or at least
Really?
comparably bad.
Wait, can you talk about that? Why is it worse? Or maybe
Well,
worse?
because he believes in like industrial policy. He believes in tariffs. He believes in economic nationalism and this kind of blood and soil nationalism. He's said nice things about labor unions. Even like his book, Hillbillyology, which I reviewed, was basically about how these poor rednecks just blamed Obama for all their problems when they needed to take personal responsibility. He talked about politicians who were selling them like spirit. I think he might have used the term like spiritual opium or something like that,
Mm.
where they would basically blame foreigners, blame China, blame Obama for their problems. I thought that was a fine critique, but he's become like a version of the politician that he's become like a caricature of that, and he's basically blaming liberals and blaming foreigners for every problem that people have. So
So
yeah,
given the choice between
I'm
JD Vance and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, one which would defend and promote the cult, AOC supports unions, and may have some those policies. I don't think that your vote would be decided. I think that you struggle with that decision, and I think you might come out supporting Vance.
it's hard to say 4 years down. Like,
True.
who knows there could be new issues that pop up and people could take new positions. Like maybe AOC like endorses the abundance agenda and like that's like, kind of makes me more and more favorable to her. Maybe Vance does something else. So it's hard to say, but like if it's like they are themselves in their current form, I really do think there is a need for conservatism to spend like 5, 10 years in the wilderness. And I think JD Vance, especially if Vance is the head of the ticket, yeah, if the election were today, I would go with AOC.
Oh wow.
4 years from now, who
Who
knows what
knows? Who
who
knows?
knows
Who
what
knows?
issues who knows what issues will be there. But yeah, that's kind of currently how I'm thinking about these things.
Since you went there, tell me what you like about abundance.
I interviewed Derek Thompson. It's a lot of it is like kind of Reaganism in a liberal cloak. I mean, it is like supply and demand, free markets. You need that for housing. Housing is the one area where we've restricted supply uh, more than just about anything else in society. And it's disastrous results. I mean, the home prices are ridiculous. I live here in Southern California. You want to buy a 3 bedroom house, just like a normal house, like a family could live in with like 1,000 square feet. It's like $1.5 million. It's kind of it's just out of reach for people, and we've just failed at a and just on a fundamental level here. And so it's largely a housing issue, the abundance agenda. They also talk about like basic scientific funding research, which we talked about earlier, which I think the returns to that are large. There's other things about like energy I'm not exactly sure about, but yeah, I mean, I think Thompson and Klein have kind of the right framework to think about some of the issues we're facing.
What do you think about critiques? Now, I'm not going to make this critique because my thoughts on abundance are pending. But there's a critique that this kind of ideology is too much embraced by the crypto dark MAGA types. Andreessens of the world, the David Sachs of the world, that Ezra and Thompson are making common cause with the crypto bros who supported Trump. Do you take that to heart?
I mean, they could be right about some things. I mean, just because Andreessen supports something or something
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean
It's
doesn't mean
bad.
it's wrong. They don't appear the tech bros don't appear to be prioritizing like YIMBYs. Like you'll never see Andreessen or Elon Musk talk about the price of housing. It's not something that they're even thinking about. They're too busy thinking about illegal immigrants voting or whatever other nonsense they're fantasizing about.
Oh, so you think
But
they're
if they
true?
do
They're
agree
true
with
believers on immigration and on woke issues.
Yeah, I mean, I think that as we talked about with like Megyn
Yeah,
Kelly and Glenn
sure.
Beck and these people, yeah, I think they've been radicalized from being online. Did you see when you saw we talked about the report when Besant was arguing with Musk and
Oh,
Musk
right.
says you're a Soros plant? Like, what kind of dumb
Yeah.
person talks like
Yeah.
that? Like, this is like the way I guess he talks in his day-to-day life. He seems to
But
be
these
no
were
different
supposed to
from
be the elite human capitals. The Elon Musks of the world, the David Sachs of the world. These are people who are supposed to be,
yeah.
they were given all the gifts. They went to good universities or otherwise had major success in private industry. So what happened there? Did elite human capital pay off?
Well, I want people should go back and read my article, the Cat Turd to Silicon Valley Billionaire Pipeline. And what I argue there is that none of us are that smart in isolation. Just me or you sitting
Mm,
here thinking about
yeah.
issues are not going to know that much. We are smart because of our own intelligence, but also because we have sources of information and people who've done scientific research and have done journalistic investigation and smart people who we read, who've made good arguments. That's the only way. And so the problem with these guys is if you find yourself on the right these days and you don't trust left-wing sources of information, all good sources of information are basically left-wing sources of information, 95% of them. And so you're going to have your view on the COVID vaccine is going to just be like, whatever rightoids happen to be saying, or your view on Ukraine is just going to be probably a lot of cases just like misinformation, less like fake news accounts. And I think that's the problem. I think Elon, I don't know, maybe maybe he's something congenital going on, maybe his brain has declined. But if not, it's just like his sources of information are bad, and it kind of makes sense. It's garbage in, garbage out.
But then he has moments of lucidity on the tariffs, or moments of lucidity where he sounds like he actually might know what's going
Yeah,
on. So he seems to be on the one hand, I can't tell because this can't have been a rational move for his business interests. That is to say, the Tesla situation and what's going on with the stocks. But if his foray into politics wasn't strictly speaking rational for maximizing output on his corporations, why then is he taking the stance that he is on tariffs? Or is it some kind of balance of do you get what I'm getting at?
yeah. I mean, it is kind of look. They're kind of winging it. Like before the election, they probably don't think that Trump is gonna do tariffs as extreme. And if you read the reporting, like even people in the White House, like within days of it happening, like weren't exactly sure what he was going to do or how far he was going to do. The market, collapsed. So it's like he's Trump is a crazy person, and it's hard to predict, and it's easy to get wrong exactly what he's going to do. But no, I think that these people supported Trump. In part, Elon looks at it and goes like, "Look, I'm gonna, they're not gonna regulate SpaceX and Tesla. They're gonna have, better, they're gonna have like, better able to deal with government. There's a lot of investigations, like dozens of investigations or lawsuits involving Tesla or SpaceX, Elon
Mm.
companies and the government, and he's going to be treated better on all of those. But they didn't want the economy. They didn't want the economy to start. We might be in a recession now. That's obviously not good for them. Um,
So that's where
and yeah,
that's where I think that there's the
they misjudged.
malicious. Yeah, I think there's a misjudging there for sure for some of these people. But I think that there is a malicious component to what's going on, and I don't hear you to deny it. So I want to be clear. I don't think that I'm pushing back on something unless you want to chime in that you disagree. I do think that a lot of what Elon Musk idea was to get favors from the government and to stop some of these
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
investigations. And that's exactly what the hell has happened. It feels like, and I want to make sure that you and I agree on this, we have never seen, at least in this century or in the last 100 years, a more corrupt administration than we're seeing now. We have the President of the United States signing off on criminal investigations to bureaucrats who declared the election fair in 2020 from the Oval Office. This is something that if Joe Biden, if we had a whisper that he was even upset with Merrick Garland at the pace that he was pursuing the election fraud case,
Yeah.
that people would be like, oh my god, I can't believe they're influencing the investigation. You have what happened with Mayor Adams that people barely talk about, an open quid pro quo.
Yeah.
We'll drop the
Yeah.
case in exchange for immigration policy, and to say nothing of the fact of the which administrations or which agencies they're targeting, like the crypto enforcement wings of institutions, and IRS agents who you want to talk about what makes government more efficient. You mentioned it actually might be necessary to get more personnel. That's an area where I have to imagine IRS agents are worth their weight in gold. So yeah, talk a bit about the corruption. Have we seen anything like this? And give me your take.
Yeah, I think you're right that this is an unusually corrupt administration. I think the meme coin thing is
Oh
probably
yeah,
like he gave us one thing, which is like the top level corruption, and he's having a dinner soon with the top 220
it's
holders
crazy.
of his coin. It is insane. And what you say about kind of the politicization of DOJ and FBI law enforcement, Cash Patel, he put a cultist into the head of the FBI when these FBI people have been super nonpartisan. They've always served the 10-year terms, so that even the president wouldn't even appoint them, and he just goes and appoints the guy who kisses his ass the most. You're right. Now with the Elon thing, I think that I looked into a lot of the cases against SpaceX and Tesla, and I'm generally sympathetic towards SpaceX and Tesla and a lot of these things. Like a lot of these things are like they're trying to send rockets
On
into
the merits, you
space,
mean?
and it's like
On the merits of the
what's that?
investigation, maybe you
On the
have
merits.
sympathy. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like it's so I thought Elon would like have a big say in government. I didn't think it was a bad thing because on the merits, I thought he was mostly right on a lot of these things. That said, corruption as a general matter is a bad thing. The fact that we have relatively non-politicized law enforcement, which the MAGAs don't believe we had because they think anyone investigated Trump or anyone prosecuted Trump, that means it's biased. I mean, I think they're just missing the fact that Trump, is doing a lot of criminal and criminal adjacent activity.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And this is like another problem with I don't know, like if we go back to like normal governance, like who's the next FBI director going to be? Is everyone just going to appoint a toady? Who's going to go back to like the old way? Maybe the Democrats do if they win. That's why I think the Democrats need to win, like, and win for a while, because they need to feel safe. If it's like this, it goes back and forth every 4 years.
Yeah.
The Democrats are going to have to behave more like the Republicans, because if the Republicans just start persecuting their enemies and pardoning everybody, like what can Democrats
No,
do?
it's
Right?
such a
Just
good point, and it's so risky. Even friends of mine, I'm not going to name them. There are people who, so I keep defending Merrick Garland. I'm one of like the last, the last watchman on the wall defending Merrick Garland and how he operated the Department of Justice. Most people think that that is a weak position among the left wing. Most people think that I am
yeah.
a coward for doing that. And
Because he went too slow. Is that it?
yeah, they're like, he went too slow and he didn't do the investigations right, and he should have been even harder and more partisan. But yeah, there is a genuine sentiment. Now, I feel the sentiment of rage and anger and wanting to see justice. Absolutely, I do, and I think that the Democrats should make. Oh, here I'm curious about what your take would be on this. So I'll ask the question after I say I think that there should be like a commission on truth and reconciliation, or whatever you want to call it, about this administration and the corruption that it was entailed. But there are a lot of people who say, if you're going to put people in Sakat and ship them off to a gulag when we're in office, that's what we're going to do to you. That's what we're going to do to Trump people. Or that's what we, if you're going to start doing this, we're going to start, being corrupt towards you. There's a lot of that going around. So maybe talk a little bit about that. And would you support an effort by Democrats to get accountability for the corruption that you acknowledged is going on here? And what way should that, accountability, if you think it should exist, how should it manifest? And what do
Yeah.
you think about the reaction here, the risk?
Look, I think that it would be nice to imagine these people getting their comeuppance. I mean, just exposing all the corruption and putting these people away in the time, in the cases where they deserve it. Um, I have a hard time seeing how you do that and you don't just tear the country apart. How you don't just make everything continuing to be up to Trump. I don't know how you get a place of like bipartisan cooperation, because the Republicans are still going to worship Trump, and you want to make it easy for them. You want them to be able to walk away and like try to go down a different path. And that's difficult if you just make everything continue to be about Trump and the Trump administration once the Trump is gone, because you're just going to get the full
What
polarization.
about
If
long-term
Democrats had,
incentives? So what do we want to disincentivize these politicians from doing this shit? Why don't I actually do want to throw some officials behind bars. The people who are doing what they're doing with Kilmar Alberto Garcia, I think a lot of these
yeah,
people should be investigated for kidnapping. I want to disincentivize this criminal, what I consider to be criminal action. What about specific deterrence in those
yeah.
cases?
Yeah, I think in specific, like, okay, yeah, it depends on what you're talking about. Kind of, regular prosecution of crimes. I think that's fine. Like a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Imagine congressional hearings where it becomes kind of the number one political story,
Yeah.
where all we're doing is kind of investigating the Trump. Then we never escape. It always becomes we're just thinking about Trump, and the Trump cult is still there, and the response to the Trump cult. And I think that that's just we're just dragging it out. Like what happens in the end? So they expose Trump. The Republicans say, "Oh, okay, Trump was corrupt. Now we believe you. Now we're going to be good, moderate, reasonable people." Like no, they're going to want to escalate. They're going to want to do stupid things.
So
And maybe they're
you're
going
not
to do
against
that very
accountability,
early.
but you don't want it to obstruct from, reunifying the country, and you think that
Yeah,
it's
you've
better
got to have
handled by
some kind of
DOJ?
peace. It's like after the Civil War. I mean, they did, they I think that I think that in the end you had to just kind of look past it. Half the country rebelled, and maybe they deserved worse things to happen to them. But like you had to, I think the wisdom is you had to move on. That was what Lincoln wanted to do, and then that's how that kind of ended up being the de facto policy after a while.
But then we had
And
like
so
segregation and bad reconstruction for maybe it
yeah.
wasn't wise. Who knows?
But yeah, I mean, but Reconstruction, I mean, was kind of a mess. I mean, but in the end, I mean, America still was America, and we
Yeah.
still eventually, moved forward. And I think these are just like difficult, kind of tragic situations. And it's like we're gonna have to, you just I think we have to have a way where you move beyond Trump mentally. Like we have to break out of the Trump mentality, and I don't think like we do it naturally. He leaves office even assuming he's not going to run a third term. I think Trump is still like the cult leader. You know how like Republicans have like a gun wing and like a abortion one issue voters.
Hmm.
They'll have 30% who are just only Trump people, and whatever Trump says they should do, that they will do. And so like we still got to be in the situation where like just the Trump cult is a major faction within Republicanism. And then if you want to have like Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, that'll be 100% of the Republican Party instead of
Yeah.
20 or 30%. And that 30% or whatever that's going to be Trump cult, that's still going to be there. There has to be a way to get like maybe generational. They die off after a while. They have to lose political victories if like some like really really normie person like Nikki Haley or something becomes a nominee, which is highly unlikely, but somehow it works out like that. You could imagine it going in that direction. And so, yeah, we've got to find a way to the Republican Party's in terrible shape. I think we all have to resist Trump at this point. I think Mark Garland, they should have probably gone faster and should have
Interesting.
locked him up because, yeah, I think that he was clearly guilty. I mean, they ended up doing like this. The special counsel, and they should have gone fast. I mean, they should have gone faster. They shouldn't have let it brush up against the election.
I think the
Um,
ultimate failure, I think the bigger responsibility here is the Supreme Court. I think what they did in Trump versus the United States is absolutely
yeah,
unforgivable.
yeah.
And
I,
go ahead.
Unquestionably, yeah. Even with that, like that could have been faster, but then you also could have had some stuff, like you could have tried the cases and you could have kept him like, you could have had convictions and you could have, if he even got the conviction of the New York case.
Yeah.
That wasn't federal, but stuff like that could have happened. You could have had convictions, like there was still it was still open to interpretation. You could
But
still
look
try
at
to
how you're
convict him
talking
of
about it. And
stuff.
this is why it's so odd. I did not expect to invite you here and to be arguing the other side on Merrick Garland, where you're arguing we should have been faster, and I'm saying that it probably was okay. I think it could have gone a little bit faster, but people, I think, argue too much. This is what I think. If you're starting to get into the window of, well, let's get these convictions on board so we can scuttle him politically, aren't you just doing what Trump is doing with the DOJ? If you're saying we want to convict him for the purpose that he be politically ruined, one, I kind of,
No,
yeah.
I mean, you don't have to look at it like that. I mean, maybe it's like your motivation, but there's also like a reasonable case for doing that on its own merits because, like, look, He is gonna maybe run for president again. He is. It is a issue. It's like it should be your priority. It's like, was there a coup, and like, did this guy
Yeah,
steal classified documents, and was he obstructing justice? And so, like, when you use your prosecutorial discretion, you go for what's important. And this is, everything involving Donald Trump was very important. So there was a case. There was a case for this. And there's a case, even like when they in the court documents, it's like, they take this into account. It's like it should, you do take it into account because there is a public interest here in getting this thing settled before the election. And look, if
I
he's
agree with
and
that.
it's not like you're framing him. I mean, if he's found not guilty, then he's not guilty, and then he's better off politically. So you just speed the process along. You're not convicting him necessarily based on that. You're just moving faster.
I agree with there was a public interest to have this done before the election, and it's a little bit of I don't know, nuance or dancing on the, what's the phrase, dancing on the head of a pin, or I don't know.
Eagle dancing on the head of a pin.
Yeah. Where no, we're not doing it to ruin him politically, but we're doing it because if he wins, there will be no justice. And I understand that those are technically different rationales. That doing it before the election to see that justice is done because if he wins, he won't have justice, and doing it because it's important are different rationales than doing it to scuttle him politically. Technically, I agree with that. Here's why I'm concerned with some of those things. I'm concerned because legally, a lot of what he's being charged with requires intent for you to show his intent, and that he in fact knew that the election was stolen. Because presumably, if he thought the election wasn't stolen, a lot of the conduct that's at issue might not be illegal, right? It literally might not be illegal. Though I wish it were, right? I wish it were illegal for him to do some of this stuff, even if he thought the election were not stolen. But as a matter of fact, it's going to be a much, much, much harder case if you don't provide that evidence. And it took a while to develop it. It took a while to get the insiders, to get people, even Vice President Pence to give that testimony. It would have been hard to charge him, for example, with incitement to insurrection, which they didn't end up charging him with. But if they had, you would have had to show that he, under the Brandenburg standard, not only that his speech was likely to induce a crowd to imminent lawless action, but that he in fact had a knowledge that it might, right? And then that he had an intent that it would. And that, I think that the best case for insurrection and incitement is when he knows that they have breached the Congress. He already knows, right? This is not past the ellipse. He already knows that these Congress people are being hunted in Congress. And at that point, when they've already been breached and where there's already lawless, then he says, Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what had to be done, thereby encouraging the rioters and giving them, Anyway, all I'm saying is these are complicated, thorny legal issues where he has actual arguments, and that I wanted it to be done correctly.
Yeah, you're I mean, you raised some good points. I think that you might want to blame Jack Smith. I think one big mistake was bringing the classified documents and obstruction case
In Florida.
where he had the option to bring it in New Jersey. And in theory that shouldn't matter, but look, once he had a Republican judge,
So wild.
that person knows.
Eileen Cannon.
Career.
Can I give a bet? If there's a nomination open for a Supreme Court seat, one of the main people under consideration would be Eileen Cannon.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. She'll at least get an appellate court. She'll at least get a promotion.
Yeah.
I mean, she did the right thing for her career. Just like the incentive, even if Trump wasn't president again, any Republican would have hated her for not ruling this way. So.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I want to also, I'm conscious of your time. Whenever you have to leave, you can just tell me. But I want to. There's one incident that I think has galvanized you and me, and sometimes with equal fervor. And I see your feed, and it's like mine, and it's about Kilmar, Abrego Garcia, and a lot of these immigration cases. I've talked to my audience at length about why this actually matters for you, even if you were an MS-13 person, which of course is heavily disputed, and why these rights matter. But talk about you personally. Why has it galvanized you the way that it has, where your Twitter feed on this issue is pretty indistinguishable to mine?
It's an extreme case. There's always been arbitrary and kind of cruel treatment of immigrants. The border customs and border patrol can delay you when you're coming into the country for whatever reason they want. We ship people overseas; they don't get full due process. JD Vance keeps making that point, which is true. But this is like on a different level. Like the government goes, it can take someone. They haven't been convicted of anything. The New York Times did a report where they looked at 200 something Venezuelans shipped to El Salvador, found like 30 or 40 of them had criminal records. The others, they had no indication that they had committed a crime or like even a social media presence or whatever that indicated they were involved with gangs or criminal activity. And you can just take these innocent people and you can just ship them overseas to go into this labor camp. And then you can, at the same time, just ignore the judicial orders that say facilitate their return to the country. And the way that they ignore they ignore, not just ignored, mocked the judicial
Yeah,
orders
they
from
did.
the Supreme Court. The way Trump and Bukele were sitting there like, oh, I can't bring them back. What about you? What about you? They're just sitting there like laughing at it. Bukele tweets out oopsie about when they said to turn the
And
planes back.
Rubio
So like, who
retweets
is
it.
yeah, yeah. And Ruby Ridge, who is this man to be like laughing at our entire criminal justice system? So it's so offensive at a deep level. Once you have this idea that like you could ship people overseas and then there's no recourse because they have no jurisdiction overseas, like where like you have to combine it with the other things too. You have to
Yes.
combine it with the fact that they are shipping people out of the country for writing the wrong op-eds. The fact that there's one Venezuelan, at least one or two Venezuelans who've just disappeared. There's no record
Yeah,
of what
there's no,
happened to
yep.
them. Like, what could be? And you think that like MAGA cares about like citizenship versus non-citizenship? These are cultists. These people have shown there's no limit into kind of things they support. So yeah, like they would ever be opposed to like disappearing citizens. Now the citizen versus non-citizen thing does have some distinction, but there's like little indication that I've seen that these people can't justify anything that Trump happens to be doing.
Uh,
And so this is something that is worth, this is a pretty basic principle. I don't know what even is, whether there's even a historical analogy here in American history, at least. And yeah, it's something, there's a debate over whether
Maybe the closest is the
this,
Bush administration, the war on terror, and like Guantanamo Bay. But even there, right when there was an order, the Bush administration followed it, and there never really was
they
a
have
fear that
lawyers.
what's that?
Yeah, they had lawyers
Yeah,
too. I mean, those people had lawyers. Those people were they had them in Guantanamo, but there was an entire process around it, and there was no idea that. And these people were often picked up in like foreign battlefields. They
yeah,
weren't just people in the U.S. who just hadn't committed any crimes and were just picked up off the street without any
and deported
kind of
outside of the country. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right on that.
yeah.
I'm actually, I don't
Well,
know
they
if
did render some of them to like Egypt and stuff, and they did like ended up torturing some of them. So there was a
yeah, there's some
little bit
Abu
of
Ghraib
that.
stuff. There's some torture stuff,
Yeah.
but in general, I trusted the Bush administration. Well, I was, I don't know how I must have been like 10 or 11, but I was born in 95. I think people expected the Bush administration to comply with an order from the Supreme Court. Here, I don't know if I'm as direct. Maybe I'm more drastic than you. If it were the case that we had a new Democratic administration and we still had rendered prisoners, hostages in El Salvador, be they American citizens or green card holders, or even people subject to American immigration law who were rendered illegally. And if it were the case that El Salvador didn't bring them back and refused to comply with our demands, I would be in favor of military action against El Salvador in that instance. I would be in favor of going into El Salvador, specifically destroying that prison and unseating the president of El Salvador if he did not comply with it with American demands. I'll let you respond to that first, and then I have something else to ask about conservative commentators in this issue.
Yeah. Well,
Certainly, if they had
I mean,
U.S.
that's
citizens, if they had U.S. citizens, would you agree?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, a few says maybe. I mean, it's a pretty dead. Look, I don't think it has to get to that point because that's
Sure,
what
yeah.
Trump says. What are we supposed to do? Invade them?
No, because
Like,
the
you don't
truth is
have
he
to
has the
there.
power, right? Because the truth is Trump actually does have the power to bring them back, and everyone knows it. And everyone who's lying and pretending that they don't have the power they know they're full of shit when they say it.
Of course. And so, yeah, I mean, the Democrats, I mean, they can look. There's so much you can do to El Salvador. I mean, it's such a small country. I mean, this is a trivial problem, and the fact that they're not even trying is just kind of an indication that they don't care. They want this. They want to fight with the courts over this. They think maybe this is good for them in terms of public opinion. So yeah, I'm with you. The Democrats hopefully will put pressure on the Bukele government.
Yeah, no, I hope so as well. And I think that Bukele is just trying. I almost don't see him. I find it very odious what he acts as and his kind of tweets. But I do think that if Trump asked him back, he'd have no problem sending him back.
Oh, I bet anything on that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I really think the movers here is the Trump administration. They're behind all this stuff. My question is on the commentator space. I often do these challenges online. I'm very obnoxious and like, debate me, all that shit. But I do think that a lot of these commentators are unwilling to have strong opposition on this particular subject because they know there's no defense to it. And if you push them a little bit, they'll be forced to admit, A, this was illegal. It shouldn't have happened. And that's hard to reconcile with their hatred, as you mentioned before, or their despising of foreigners. That to me explains it all, right? Because I think they'll be loath to say we should do something that's illegal. But some of them are starting to say it. You have certain member here. I'm thinking of like, I forget the exact person. You might have retweeted this or quoted this person who said we should dissolve or absolve the Supreme Court, and
a bunch of them have said that. Like there's one, Sean Davis from the Federalist, just a really stupid person.
Yeah.
And somebody like Jesse Kelly might have said that. Yeah, a few of them have said stuff like this. Now I'm remembering the exact tweet. I think it was Sean Davis because I was like, and then I said they have a 6-3 majority. On and just like, it's not good enough for them.
Which makes the lie that they won 9-0 that Richard or that oh my God, Stephen Miller said in the Oval Office, we won 9-0. The notion that Sotomayor, Kagan, and Jackson were on your side, and that like that by itself disproves this, the ridiculous lie. And I think that the Supreme Court is spooked. To bring it back to the judiciary, I think that Roberts has made a rod for his own back with what he did on executive power pre-Trump version 2. And now I think they're spooked, even Alito, even these people. And if you had to guess, do you think that the administration is willing to openly defy the Supreme Court even more than they're doing so right now?
No, I don't think they would openly defy it, but there is a kind of thing where they kind of lie about what the Supreme Court said, and they always pretend like they're acting in accordance with what the Supreme Court is doing or any court is doing. And then the whole thing depends on kind of good faith. And I think when courts lose the belief that the administration is acting in good faith, we could get, they could get tougher on them, which I think would be generally welcome. But anyways, Pico, it's been great talking to you. I'm happy to be in the kind of the streaming space. It's a kind of a new experience for me. And thanks for inviting me on.
Thank you so much, Richard. Let's talk again, and appreciate your insight.
All right,
later.